Good afternoon from Austin, Texas, and thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to today's webinar with the Texas Oral History Association. My name is Leah DeForest, and I'm the Communications Manager with Texas Digital Library, and I'm joined today by Alex Suarez, our Administrative Associate and Conference Planner. So Texas Digital Library is grateful to our members, many of whom are on this call today and are pictured on this slide. Our members put their trust in TDL to provide essential infrastructure and services like digital preservation, digital repository hosting, and tools for managing ETDs and research data. We provide online secure access for our members' digital collections and materials, and we're really grateful to get to work with the fabulous members in our consortium. And we invite any institution who's interested in becoming part of our consortium to reach out to us. We really need your energy and your expertise to continue growing the digital library community in this region. And we're especially interested in partnering with our colleagues at HBCUs across Texas. So I invite you to join TDL and connect with our amazing, fun, and brilliant community of librarians and archivists. So now for some housekeeping. We at Texas Digital Library are big fans of Bill and Ted because they are, as you well know, most triumphant, and especially because they believe in being excellent to each other and others. And we at TDL ask that you also be excellent to each other. We are dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. And so we ask that everyone here today be considerate and respectful in speech and action, attempt collaboration before conflict, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and please be mindful of your environment and of your fellow participants. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will publish slides and recordings and share them with all of you in attendance today, and also post on our YouTube and in our repository. For using Zoom today, again, we do ask that you keep your microphones and videos muted until our Q&A session at the end. And we hope that you'll use the chat box to say hello, let others know that you're here, or make comments throughout. And if you have a question, please type it into chat. We'll have some time at the end of today's presentation for your questions. Okay, so now on with the show. Today's presenter is Stephen Sielaff, the Senior Editor and Collections Manager with the Institute for Oral History at Baylor University. Stephen also serves as the Secretary-Treasurer with the Texas Oral History Association, and he's going to present to us today about metadata standards for oral history. Stephen, we'll stop sharing our screen, and then you can start sharing yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Leah. I do have to make one quick correction. I'm not the Secretary-Treasurer of TOHA, but I am the Editor-in-Chief of TOHA's journal, The Sound Historian. Okay. Can you see my PowerPoint? All right.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, thank you. All right. So hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you all today to talk about oral history metadata and standards. So I am from the Baylor University Institute for Oral History. I am a member of not only the Texas Oral History Association, but the Oral History Association, which is the national entity for oral history. And kind of in these guises, both as a collection manager and as a task force member on a national task force dedicated to metadata, I've been in the weeds with oral history metadata ever since I took over my position here at Baylor about 6 years ago. So Leah and Alex mentioned a little bit about origin stories and how those could be interesting to the participants, especially those who might still be in school or early in their career. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how I came to my current position. So Baylor is located in Waco, Texas. I'm a Waco native. I attended Baylor for my bachelor's, in which I got a history and religion degree. Lived in Colorado for a few years and then came back to Baylor to get a MA in museum studies. Because it had been a few years since I had attended college, I decided to kind of dip my toes in and get back into the flow. And so I asked my favorite history professor, is there anything going on this summer before my program starts? And he said, sure, Dr. Sloan is teaching seminar in oral history this summer. I think you'd enjoy that. So I took that class. It had nothing to do with the credits needed for my program, but I decided to take that class. And about halfway through the summer, through that class, Dr. Sloan, who's now my boss, um, offered me a position as a GA to work within the Institute, basically working on special projects that we've received grants for, because I had a certain amount of technological background. So I worked on a couple of grant funded projects that summer and then into the next 2 years of my master's program. And I ended up creating a master's project built around oral history, which was the oral history of the Mayborn Museum, which is our university museum here on campus. So I did kind of an origin story of the university museum as it exists right now. After that, I was offered a temporary staff position to stay with the institute. And less than a year later, my predecessor said that she was going to retire, so I applied for her position and was able to move into that position. So one of the main things here I just wanted to mention to everyone is I look back at this time and I realize there are a couple things going on here that enabled me to benefit from this. Sometimes people just call it being in the right place at the right time. But part of this for me was kind of looking for that extra opportunity, looking for something outside of the norm as far as the program was concerned, and then looking for work opportunities while I was at school. So instead of working, let's say, kind of a menial type assistantship within the museum itself, I was able to work at the Oral History Institute, get a lot of other skills, gain a lot of skills, and in particular started focusing on things that I felt like the institute could benefit from. So those are the sort of things that I think helped enable me into the career path and where I am today. Okay, I wanted to kind of start out by just talking a little bit about the Institute itself, collection-wise, because I'm going to talk about processing and kind of collection management alongside the metadata and description discussions today. So at the Institute, we've been around since 1970. This was going to be our big celebratory 50th anniversary year, and then of course COVID hit. So we called a mulligan. So we're actually going to do a lot of those celebratory events next year. But we're creeping up on 7,000 interviews total in our collection. Of those, over 4,000 are available online. And I'll talk more about the process to get it there in a little bit. We've also been doing a pretty extensive digitization project since I came in. So we have over 5,200 digital audio files preserved, 3,200 of which are online. So it's another big thing that I started is putting audio alongside the transcripts we had. We've had some slowdowns, of course, due to the pandemic. So I was hoping 2020 would be the year that we finished digitizing everything, but we're moving that forward to 2021 now. And a little later, I'll talk more about what did happen this year as we had a huge transition, not just for our collection, but for all the Baylor digital collections, in which that we moved from Content DM, which was basically our first CMS for digital collections here at the university, to Cortex. And my collection proved to be the most problematic, and we'll get into that some too. And so we just 2 weeks ago we were able to finalize the collection, so I'll actually be able to show it off to you. So there's a series of collections on the right there that our institute houses. We are tasked with the history of Baylor University, so we've got over 1,000 interviews just on Baylor. We've got over 1,000 interviews based on our local city, county history, and then we have a good number of interviews based around our kind of Baptist heritage as well. Our collection is mainly regional, and however, with the good number of grant projects and fellowships that we offer every year, we've got this kind of special collection within the archive as well, where we can bring in projects from basically anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country. And in addition to that, we engage faculty members all across the university. So it could be a physicist that wants to interview the individual who was basically in charge of ITS at Baylor in its infancy. So we gain all those sort of interesting projects as well. Okay, like I said, there's a certain process that the institute undergoes to create their materials and make them available for public consumption. And so this chart is just a representation of that a bit. The main things I want to say here is we are a full transcription shop. We have been since 1970. So students have transcribed all of our interviews. And this summer, when I came into my position, we had a queue of between 300, 400 interviews to transcribe. And this summer, we actually caught up with that queue, again, somewhat due to the pandemic. Um, and we're also have been experimenting with automated transcription lately as well, and I've done some research in that sector if anyone's interested in asking about that later. But the main thing here is that we're producing metadata in the form of the transcript, in the form of this basic text that thankfully through our CMS is fully text searchable. But we're also adding metadata to databases. We've got an internal FileMaker Pro database that tracks the process of all our interviews. And then we're also tracking a review process even after we've created a transcript and edited the transcript, and that we allow every individual who has conducted an oral history with us to review their transcript before it is placed online. And so once that process is done, then it goes online. Okay, so I thought to kind of get into the metadata description side of things today, I would share with you. So we've been doing online e-workshops, webinars, whatever you want to call them, for more than a decade now at the Institute. And so I wanted to kind of give you a peek as far as how we, or how I, and more in particular, um, explain and describe the oral history processing, archival connection, and metadata processed to those who are basically coming to us. They might have zero oral history experience, or they might have a little bit, but they're not familiar with the systems that we use to house collections or whatnot. So this is kind of a peek under the hood, so to speak, of how we're presenting this to the general public. And one of the things that I talk about is why you should archive. So a lot of folks start an oral history project, especially these days. They have cloud-based solutions, they have portable drives, they have Amazon Glacier and other deep storage opportunities, and some of them might think that they want to just store things themselves as they're working on their project or even afterwards. And so we talk about some of these topics of why you should archive. And so this impacts most of you who are working in a library and archival situation, where we try to tell them this will be good for accessibility. This will be good for discoverability. In a lot of cases, there's a deed of gift or contract language that already exists for these archives and libraries that they can use. And so we kind of press upon them that this is actually a good thing, something that you want to do. On top of that, something else I wanted to mention is how they choose their archive. And so I make a point of telling them it's not always the archive that you already have a familiar relationship with, and it's not always the closest one to you. So one of the main things we talk about is obviously the archive has to accept oral history materials and what that entails, which typically means media at the very least, if not the transcript or other text files that go along with it. Um, and then we also want to try to pair them up with collections that have a mission similar to the project topic. And then, of course, these are things that we in the library and archive sciences are fully in support of these days. Long-term researcher access policies, making our materials available to the world. That seems like common sense right now, but even like 20 years ago or so, it wasn't so much. It was more weighted on the preservation side than the access side. So these are things that are still questions that our oral historians are asking. So this is how I present the digital preservation life cycle to them. So I tell them right off the top that they should establish a relationship with their archive before they start their project. And this is mainly so that they can iron out all these details and make sure there's no surprises at the end. And then, of course, if there's room for any sort of like cloud-based uploads or whatever, you could be doing that while you're in the process of conducting your project. But at the same time, we're telling them to be good stewards. Lots of copies keep stuff safe for all their digital files and keeping things protected and stored in multiple locations and all that good stuff while they're conducting their projects. And then I talk to them about documenting, which I'll show you more here in a second. It's kind of why we're here today, talking about metadata and description of how best to either gather the metadata themselves, even though they might not be necessarily aware of the fact that we call it metadata, and this is something that we highly value, or it's something that they're prepping for us so that librarians or archivists can use it later. And then, of course, this the deposit phase. Once they're done, most projects are like this: is once they're actually done with all their interviews, maybe they've got them transcribed or they pulled however much they need out of there to write their book, write their article, create their documentary, and whatnot. Then that material is ready for deposit. Okay, so this is what I tell the public about metadata. I call it the M word, metadata. So we define it as data about data, and usually how I describe it to them is probably where people have experienced metadata the most without realizing it is if they have any sort of MP3 player, iTunes or whatnot, and they have a song they're listening to and it's got all the details about the song, especially if they're in iTunes. And all of that is metadata, all these little descriptors about when the song was recorded, who the producer was, who the artist was, the genre, all that stuff is metadata. And then I tell them metadata for oral history exists from the very point of creation. It could be technical metadata that you're not even seeing being created on your actual recording device itself. That media file, whether it's an audio or video file, has metadata embedded into it. All the way to where we're disseminating our interviews and we're making them available online. And that's the descriptive metadata that we add, these fields that we add for our objects, for our collections, so that people can actually find these things. Not only that you learn more when you get there, but hopefully there's some sort of interoperability with the searching so that you can find these things. So as far as metadata with media is concerned, and some of this might be a little new to some of you. So what we do at the Institute, we actually embed a certain amount of metadata, descriptive metadata, into our audio files as we're processing them. And that's what this image is. It's a metadata window from, what's the name of it? It's our wave format. WaveLab is the name of it. Sorry about that. WaveLab is the from Steinberg is the platform that we use for audio concatenation, wave master file creation, access file creation, technical cleanup, things like that. So we embed actually like 10 fields worth of metadata into the object itself, so that if for some chance, which should never happen, if for some chance this object gets lost and somebody discovers it in collection or whatnot, all they have to do is bring up that window and they have a snapshot into how this works. And so for this works with our audio processor and our audio editor itself, but there are standalone products like BWF MetaEdit, MetaX, it's now MetaZ for Mac and for video that you can use to do this. And so this is just like an extra layer. But as I said, a lot of our metadata comes from the point of creation, and then it's kind of carried through. It's point of creation from the record itself, point of creation from the transcript, because we are a full transcript shot. Everything that's going to be in that transcript is going to be available as metadata. Every word is going to be searchable eventually. And then, of course, we're creating a summary file, an abstract is what we call it. That will be metadata. But this is a couple examples of how we do this. So on the left is our interview data form. So I usually call it the Holy Trinity, the three things that we need if someone wants to do an oral history project with us to give it to us before we process is an interview data form, a deed of gift contract, and the media itself. So the data form gives us a lot of this raw data about the interview itself, when it took place, the people who are involved in the interview, specific things that happened maybe during the interview that people need to be aware of. So all of this stuff is ingested into our FileMaker Pro database in order to carry that forward as we're conducting transcript creation, abstract creation, and then eventually putting it online. And then on the right there, our old content DM core metadata values. I had a student worker one time challenge me to condense it all down into one sheet, all the fields that we use, all the data we use, so that it could just be a one sheet that somebody can take, and I still have it in front of me right here. Um, and so these are all the fields. So this is at the end. This is the dissemination phase. These are the fields that we carry through to describe the objects as they exist online. Okay. So with all that said, this was kind of a peek, into how we present metadata to folks, how we do metadata here at the Institute. I'll show more about the collection later, but I wanted to take a little time now and talk about what makes oral history metadata unique. So some of you may have handled oral history materials in the past in your collection. Some of you might be considering it, or maybe a little scared about what all it might entail. And you should be scared. I don't want to quote Yoda here, but yeah, you should be. So why is it unique? What are the things you need to consider when bringing in oral history into a digital collection or an archive or library? The first thing is, my boss jokes that this is the theme of our national conference every year. What is oral history? What is the thing? And so there, over the course of oral history as a profession's lifetime, which you can pretty much start with post World War II. A lot of the historians that were going and collecting oral histories and or trying to figure out how this is going to work, how we want to present this in the historical record. So it's around that time up to now. How do we define oral history? Well, early on, it was taking your wire recording or your reel to reel deck out, recording someone, bringing it back, someone's transcribing it. Once you get it transcribed, that's the thing. And there were people that were even like deleting tape or reusing tape once they had that written record, because that was kind of the historical norm. Since then, as we've moved into the digital age, it becomes more and more the media is the thing, is the primary thing. So if you're going to be like quoting an oral history, for example, you're going to be at the most unique essence is the what was actually said on the recording, because even if you have a really good transcript, which we try to have for all of our interviews, they're not 100%. So anyone who wants to reference or quote goes to the media. And so nowadays people see that media file as the thing. But you have these other things that come along with oral histories, and some people might consider that the thing, like the transcript or the index or the audio log. So how you wrap your head around those two different things. So this is a dual material type that I talk about, the AV in a paper world. So you might have a collection, for example, or you might be used to describing things that are paper based, whether it's books, articles, just archival collections of papers and documents and whatnot. And suddenly you have this media thing in there. It might be an analog media thing in there. It might be a cassette or a open reel tape or a VHS tape or a Betamax tape or something. Or it might be a digital object these days that lives either independently on a digital server as it was uploaded to you, or it might actually be in the form of a disk or a hard drive or a thumb drive or something like that. So how do we take these two things, these two disparate things, and describe them and keep them connected and make them discoverable, and so that everything is represented correctly? So this is one of the challenges of metadata. Another long form description challenge. So one of the things for us, reason why we do full text transcripts, is because there is so much content within one single oral history interview typically. Our average length for our oral histories last few years has been 1.15 hours. That usually equates to anywhere from 25 to 30 pages. And that's typically, I would say, 10 to 12 major topics during that time. So if you start to think about all these descriptor points or all these categories, especially if you have, say, like a life history style oral history interview, how do you describe that? How do you use categories, subject headings, whatnot, to describe this entire thing? You can, that would be great, so that anybody looking for anything in that interview can find that, but it obviously takes a lot of time. And not everyone is transcribing, not everyone is providing an index or an abstract of an oral history for you. So that's a challenge. Shared authority is a challenge. This is more to do with legal ethical side of things, but this is something that you have to consider as far as rights of not only interviewee, the interviewer, and then you as the deposited archive or library. So there are several oral history collections in the world that are struggling with this, and that they have these legacy collections, in some cases great legacy collections, but the releases of these people who gave these interviews are nowhere to be found, or they're spotty at best. So how you handle that as far as describing what's available, what's not, that's another interesting, unique facet of oral history. Recent biographical identifiers. So this is kind of a current trend in oral history, is giving the interviewee especially, but also the interviewer, their agency to identify themselves, as opposed to us as catalogers, librarians, or whatever, identifying them and getting a sense of how much say should we have in that particular environment, especially if it's an older oral history interview, because it's not necessarily something that they were asked in the interview, how they identify themselves, or what they are now as opposed to what they were at that point, and how do we define these people, how do we describe these people. uh, Invariably you're going to come across some sensitive topics in oral history. We have an entirely different restricted oral history contract deed of gift form for folks that want to restrict things for a number of years. We often see this with people who are interviewed about a place they work, but they're not retired yet or not done with that work, so they want to restrict it for a number of years. In some cases, it's just whatever came up. That's one big thing why we allow everybody to review their oral histories, is you get to talking and you say something that you didn't realize you said until you see it on the page or listen to it again. And then you suddenly say, oh, well, I either need to strike this or I need to restrict it because I don't want so-and-so to hear this, or I don't want this to be public knowledge yet. So that's going to impact how you're not only processing these oral history materials, but also how you're describing this material. Do you do a redacted transcript or redacted topic list? Do you simply put a disclaimer about these materials will be available in 2025 or something like that? So those are all things to think about. Um, and then long custody chains. Most oral histories have a long lifespan from the time that the project was founded to the time that they find their way to an archive or a library. Or for us, at least, if we're partnering with folks and they're coming in as they're conducting them, until it gets to the point where it's they've completed their last interview, we've processed all the interviews, we've transcribed all the interviews are reviewed, and now we're able to place these objects online. So custody chains are a big part of this, and who all is touching this interview record, how they're contributing to the metadata, how they're contributing to the description. Do they know they should be contributing to the description? Do they know the person who's conducting this interview, they should provide some sort of data form or some sort of information about who this person was, what this project was, why this was conducted. Provide some clarifications on proper names or places, or things like that. And then of course, as the years go by, how those things come into discovery, how they're used, how they're utilized, who's valuing what as a cataloger versus an oral historian, things like that. So this means there's a great potential for metadata out there, but it's also can be a little iffy as far as if you're collecting everything that you need by the time, say, we're putting it online and we're describing these objects. Okay. So with that, I wanted to kind of dive into what's kind of going on in the field from a national level, what's going on for our collection, and some exclusivity here. A new tool that we've developed with the Metadata Task Force that is in beta phase right now, so I can show off a bit. So I'm going to exit out my slideshow right now, and I am going to launch another share of my screen here. Okay. All right. So the first thing I wanted to show you today is the Oral History Association's website, which is just oralhistory.org. Last year, I served on a task force to help develop a specialized archiving oral history module for the Manual of Best Practices for Oral History. So OHA has long held and revised a general best practices and principles for actually conducting oral history, conducting it ethically, whatnot. But we've had this burgeoning archiving, libraries and librarians and archivists joining oral history, being a part of the oral history practice. So we developed this series of best practices that's available under the resources tab here on the OHA website. And we just kind of describe how best to use this, some other things to think about, and then we get right into it. So we talk about things like appraisal and accessioning, and then we get down to metadata. But I'll come back to this. But we talk more about preservation policies, access policies, when to make it available, when not, how transcription is involved in that. All these collaborators that you're going to be involved in, like I said, the narrators themselves, practitioners throughout the course and the life cycle of the interview, various institutions and organizations, and what impact they have. And then, of course, the community. I haven't really mentioned this yet, but typically when we're conducting e-workshops and whatnot, we try to impress upon everyone that's going out and conducting an oral history project of someone or of something to give back to that person or give that back to that thing once they're done, and provide them all this wonderful knowledge that they've gathered as part of this. And then I talked about earlier the ownerships and rights management issues, mainly due to the fact that there's two entities involved here. So I wanted to just kind of briefly show you what's under the metadata and description heading. So it talks about the task force, and I'll show you some of our work here soon. But we kind of boil down the types of metadata that you're interested in collecting into administrative. Most of this will probably never see the light of day. Most of this is just for our own use. Descriptive metadata, this is mainly for us as we're not only in the process of processing this interview, but also eventually sharing it. A lot of the technical metadata, some of it we might input into whether it's the media file or the actual record itself. Some of it is auto created for us. Um, the preservation process, especially for a lot of these legacy collections. So I mentioned our digitization project. So there's a lot of metadata, a lot of new fields that I created within our internal FileMaker Pro records of keeping track of when things were digitized, when things are available to go online, what possible problems came up, what formats we're dealing with now, things like that. And then, of course, the rights and access material that we talked about, everything from the copyright and licenses and restrictions over time. So one of the things that we did as a task force that I'll show here in a second, and then that we denoted here in this section, is when to collect metadata. So we really want to make a push for everyone that you can collect metadata whenever. And it's best to document as much of this as possible and have it carried forth in the life cycle. And so we denoted kind of these four main life cycle phases where metadata is collected: pre-interview, interview, processing, dissemination. So pre-interview is basically everything you're doing to research and prep for the project before the interviews take place. The interview itself, it's everything. It's like that data form I mentioned, everything that's happening at the interview level, and anything that people need to be made aware of once the interview is over. Processing is anything that you're doing with that interview between the time of its inception and the time it goes online. In some cases, this might not be much of anything. In other cases, like ours, it's a lot. It's everything that goes into the transcript, it's everything that goes into our index, it's all the review phases and keeping track of those. And then, of course, the dissemination, On the back end, it's the administrative elements so that we're making sure that we're disseminating it properly. And then on the front end, the user end, it's everything that they can see to describe this particular oral history. So we talk a lot about kind of the unique nature of oral history metadata and the unique nature of how oral history collections often find themselves within grander collections. So for example, the Baylor Digital Collection that's in Cortex right now, there's over 60 different digital collections within the greater university collections, and of which we are one. And we are the one of maybe 2 or 3 media-based collections. All other are basically scanned based, whether it's maps or documents, PDFs, whatnot. Um, so where are we? Uh, what rules do we have to follow as just archivists or librarians within a greater scheme? And how best can we apply the things that matter to oral history to the things that matter to the institution as far as how things are normalized and presented. This can be anything from like a schema to a particular number of fields allowed within your own CMS and how best to describe your collection, even if not all of those fields are being like uploaded to Primo or something like that to be shared with a greater audience. So these are all things that we try to note here and talk about within this best practices document. Now to move on to the task force. So it's our kind of splash page for the task force is underneath this committee's task force and interest group heading for the OHA page. So there's 4 of us currently serving on the task force, and we've kind of been in business since 2015. And so this task force came about through the Archives Interest Group meeting at the Oral History Association, in which a lot of us were interested in things like normalization of metadata standards, of field names, practices, the whole kit and caboodle, basically. So some of us came together. We wrote some micro essays about what we're interested in, what we're going to be doing. In 2016, the task force met here in Waco at Baylor to kind of plan out the years ahead. And so what we ended up doing was we conducted 2 national surveys of oral history metadata. The first was specific to oral history programs and centers, basically those that are the most in the weeds about oral history collection management. And then the second was a more national survey of anyone could participate if they had a collection. So I think we had over, I think it's 60 respondents in that second phase, for example. So the survey data helped focus what was important to the field, what was going on in the field, and it helped our other project at this time, which was creating a rubric, creating a elements list, because we had a certain amount of data from various other workshops and brainstorming sessions and whatnot, as far as the sheer number of fields out there that could apply ways you can describe the oral history itself and the process. So we took the better part of a year gathering all that data, pulling all that data together. We decided to go with the life cycle management, the 4 parts of the life cycle as far as how to split it up. And then we started working on field names and descriptors of these field names and what they all may contain and should they be repeatable and whatnot. So we ended up creating a master elements list last year of over 150 possible elements to describe oral history. But we didn't just want to create that list, and we had a lot of help along the way of people being able to view it and analyze it and whatnot. We didn't want to just create that list. We wanted to allow people to interact with that list and to learn what was important to them. And so we began working on this concept of user personas. So each of us on the task force, for example, we manage a different collection. We come from a different background. And so what's important to me in my collection or even at the project level for metadata description might not be the same for the other. So we decided to start creating these personas for ourselves to kind of describe ourselves kind of as archetypes and the sort of things that we're interested in, so that someone coming to this topic could find someone similar to them and get a sense, maybe a jumping off point as far as what they would be interested in with metadata. So this resulted in what was going on this year, two things that are going on this year that are really close to being finished. The first is the full elements list is finished, but the creation of a online oral history metadata element chooser tool that I'm going to show off here next. The second is taking all that national survey data and creating what will basically become the first official white paper produced by the Oral History Association on this topic. And I just final edited that a week ago. It's about 25 pages long, and kind of the width and breadth of all the Q&A that were involved in that survey and what we found and what we feel like are the next steps in this field. So all that to say, I can now show you the beta version of the what we're calling the metadata prototype here, the metadata task force tool. So this will be cleaned up a little bit, but for the most part, what the tool is, it's three different facets. The best way to describe it. You can just download the full list that we created, either as a PDF or as a CSV file. It can be all yours. Or you can go and take a look at some of the personas that were created. So right now, we have the four personas of the four individuals, Lauren Cada, JC Voss, Natalie Milbrot, and I. Our personas as far as what's interesting to us regarding oral history, metadata, our particular job titles, our particular collections, strengths and weaknesses, what we're in, what our needs are, whatnot. And then, in addition to all that, you can actually see a list that I created, the elements list. So I went through like the full elements list and picked the ones that we're interested in, and obviously the ones that we're using right now. And then you could take that list and start there if you wanted. Or you can just work your way through the entire list. So I'm going to kind of show you how that works now. So we got some intro text, and then we go through these four phases: plan, interview, process, and disseminate. And what you see are the field names. So these are the normalized field names that we fell upon. And anything that we felt like needed more description, there's an info column as well. So you can read through all of these field names and make choices as you go through. And then you go to the next process after that and make your way through the interview process, the processing process, the dissemination process. And then by the time you're done, you basically just put in your name and your email address, and your own list, your specialized list of metadata elements is then emailed to you for use later. So what are we looking for from this? Like, what do we want people to get away from this? Obviously, this can be anyone from who's brand new to metadata, brand new to oral history, to just be able to go through the list and think about all these things and realize any and all of these things might be important to someone down the line to help describe this oral history. But one of the things that we've noticed as we've had people testing and involved in our process is getting them to think about their own collections. And so I'll go back to this oral history, our task force splash page. We actually have an email here that I will share with anyone that's interested in doing any sort of beta testing with our materials, or is just more interested about this process or whatnot. They can contact us, and we're in the process of signing up beta testers right now and getting them through the system. Not only is this great for us, obviously, to refine the tool and make sure that everybody understands it, it's great for anyone who's going through the process, honestly. Okay. So now I'm just going to briefly start about 5 minutes past, so I've got about 5 minutes left here. Kind of show you some of what we do at the Institute as far as how we're defining our oral histories and how it looks in our collection. And then I'll share with you some other resource links at the end, and then we can take some Q&A. So this year, as I said, we had the big transition from Content DM to Cortex. Our collection was pretty unique in that once they got into our transcripts and realized they had to pull image files from every page of our transcripts, they were able to ascertain that we had 177,000 images, which are pages, for us to process, which made us the largest image collection at Baylor, in addition to the fact that we are obviously by far the largest media collection as well. So I actually spent a good part of the year rebuilding not just our CMS that people interact with online, but also our preservation structure, our archival information packet structure, because the two work congruently now. So if you go to our collection, this is what Cortex looks like. Cortex is fairly new, so you might not be familiar with it. And I was joking with Leah before because we just got this online. Unfortunately for me, anything that has a metadata error in it shows up first because the entire collection should only be oral memoirs of and then alphabetical. So anyone's title who is misspelled, such as oral memoir or oral memories or whatever, shows up first in our collection right now. So that's one of the first things I'll be correcting now that I have the ability to download a spreadsheet and correct the entire collection all at once. But let me just go to one of these objects here. So as you can see, this is a series, an interview series. So oral memoirs of series 1 transcript. This is the transcript file. And then underneath here, we have the various metadata fields that we're using currently for this particular oral history. Some of them are more internal, like the digital ID. Some of them are more based on things that you can search. So any metadata field that has text that you can search is discoverable across the entire collection, across the entire digital collections of Baylor University. We have a link to our rights statement. We have basic descriptors of the series itself. And up here for the summary, we have a basic descriptor of the entire series. And then if we want to, we can go from the transcript to the audio file via the audio link that will bring up the actual audio object like this. And same, almost similar metadata, some of it more specific to media. So the big thing for us, the two large things for us in moving to Cortex, at least as far as I'm concerned, was search functionality. Um, we used to have a character limit when it came to full text fields in Content DM, and I actually had to break apart series because of that. But now there is no character limit. And so literally every word and all these 4,000 interviews is text searchable. So that's pretty powerful. But then all the metadata is text searchable too. And then as I mentioned before, the ability to basically pull off from Cortex a complex spreadsheet of all the metadata for the entire collection and be able to search through, find, find and replace and whatnot is going to be awesome for us as well. So that's how things look right now for our digital collection. And as far as the links that I wanted to leave you with, if you're interested more in whether it's metadata or description based, or just anything to do with technology or preservation or process for oral history, there's a few links, and I'll get back on the PowerPoint here in a little bit. And when I share the PDF of the PowerPoint, you'll have all these links as well. But the Texas Oral History Association, the baylor.edu/toha/technology brings you here, which is basically a web page companion piece to an article I wrote a few years ago on oral history technology. And then anything to do with recording or preservation or file management or processing or whatnot, anything I talk about in the article and anything that I find of interest since that point, I've added as links here. So there's all that you can explore. Other sites, Oral History in the Digital Age, which is ohda.matrix.msu.edu, is a site that's been around since 2013, I believe. It's an aggregator for all things digital in oral history. There are like thesauri in here of archival terms. There are best practices documents, best practices videos. If you're interested in the actual equipment itself, there's actually like reviews of equipment, reviews of microphones and whatnot in here that you can check out. So that's a good side as well. And then the last site I wanted to leave you with is our own site. So the Institute, baylor.edu/oral history/getting started is our next e-workshop. So what I presented to you earlier, some of those slides, as far as people who are just coming to oral history, learning how to do their oral history project, if that describes any of you, if any of you within your work at your institutions have thought, hey, this is a good time. For example, all these baby boomers are retiring. Maybe we should interview some of these folks and learn exactly how all these things were done, or gather all this institutional knowledge before they all retire and leave us for greener pastures. Um, this might be for you. So our next workshop is in February. It's $100 to sign up for 2 weeks of instruction, 3 hours, consecutive Wednesdays, and we can basically go A to Z of the entire oral history process. So I wanted to make sure y'all were all aware of that as well. So I think with that, I went a few minutes over, Leah, but
That's great.
but I think that will do it for me right now, and I will be happy to look into the chat and take any questions you might have. Leah, however you want to manage this, I'll leave that to you.
Right on, will do. And I do see we do have a couple questions at least in chat. And everyone, you're welcome to unmute your video, show your faces. We'll take the next 7-8 minutes just to go through questions and enjoy our time with Stephen, which thank you, by the way, Stephen, that was such a good presentation. And like your predecessors, Abra and Adrian from the Oral History Association who joined us last time, you've all been extremely generous with sharing your work and your knowledge. And it's we just really appreciate it. So I do want to get to a question in chat in a second, but I was also wondering if you could, well, a couple of things, Stephen, they're favors here. Will you be able to share the links with some of the things you shared? I know we've had a few shares in chat, but if not in chat here, then Alex and I can share out links with attendees
Yeah,
in a follow-up email.
so I believe you said you usually share the presentations
Yeah,
afterwards. So I'll send you a PDF of my PowerPoint. On my PowerPoint, I have the links to all the things that I was able to show.
excellent.
It's just easier to do it through the web tour. So yes.
Perfect. Okay, will do. And again, get to your questions in Q&A and chat. First come, first serve. But one other quick question, Stephen, you mentioned a call for volunteers for beta testing
Mhm.
and possibly looking to get some student involvement with this work. Could you talk a little bit more about your call for volunteers?
Sure. So we're at the point now where we want people to start using our online tool and to not only, if you don't have to have experience as a beta tester, you don't have to, get your magnifying glass out and see things that aren't, right, justified or whatever. We mainly want to make sure people who work through the tool, that everything makes sense to them, that it works as they anticipate it should. And the way that we're setting up some of our beta testers also is we're actually communicating with them and giving them kind of a pre-interview, so to speak, before they get into the tool, to let them know everything that we're interested in, and just to make sure that they understand what their role is. So on that metadata task force page, we have our email. You can contact us via email to the Google group there if you're interested in being a tester. And we'll probably get that going, after the holidays. Obviously, I think we're going to have one or two that we manage before the holidays here. But anyone who's interested in that, like I said, it's not just great from a testing, like you're volunteering to do this. I think it's great that you're actually interacting with that list, and hopefully as you're going through these myriad fields, it's queuing things up in your in your head as far as things that you want to talk to somebody about, or you might want to reconsider, because that was a big part for us, all these brainstorming sessions, all this data we brought together to make this 150 plus elements list, master elements list. A lot of these things were not necessary. Obviously we don't have 150 fields in our collection, A lot of these things were new or things that we hadn't thought about in a while that we might need to reconsider regarding how we describe our collections.
Okay, great. And then just to reiterate, there's an email for the Metadata Task Force Google group on the website that we'll share in the
Yeah,
follow-up.
yeah.
A
I'll go ahead and
question
post it in
from,
chat.
okay, thanks. So a question from Lily, could you repeat what you called the Holy Trinity of Metadata?
Yes, I feel like it might be blasphemous a little bit being from Baylor and saying that, but so it's
We
not
won't
so
tell.
it's it is at its as most base level, it is metadata, but for us it's also for processing. So things, so any of you who are looking to take in oral history materials, these are the things that I require, otherwise we're not touching it. So the first is the data form, and data form come in all shapes and sizes. Veterans History Project, for example, has a multi-page data form specific to the veteran, where they served, what awards they got, things like that. We have a fairly basic biographical data form, but it has a few other things for us as far as administration of what we're looking for. So data form is first. Deed of gift or contract, whatever you want to call it, is second. I think Adrian probably talked some about that last time. Legal, ethical, I don't have time to get into everything that's involved in a typical oral history deed of gift, but making sure that both participants or all participants, if it's a group interview, have signed off and basically made available their oral history to the depositing institution. That's key. And that's basically from our past. When I look back in our past, we have entire projects that we did all the transcription, all the editing for before we got those forms. And then we never got those forms. And then we couldn't do anything with that material. So we don't process, we don't transcribe, we don't put all the effort until we have that. And then, of course, third is the media, and hopefully it's the original media. In most cases, we're talking about the SD card that comes from the recording device, audio or video, that has the raw files. For us, what I do is I do a backup of the raw files. We create a preservation master from the raw files, all that sort of stuff. In WAV format, we can talk more about formats in the future webinar, but in a preservation worthy format. So those three things, unless we have all three of those things, work does not start as far as like the transcription process and whatnot.
I can see why you'd call it the Holy Trinity. Thank you for that. For those of you who are peeling off, I just want to remind everyone we still have a couple questions in chat if you have time, Stephen, just to stay a couple minutes late.
I'm
Okay,
fine.
great. But if you do need to peel off, please keep in mind we'll follow up with an email, and this webinar is being recorded. So go to your next meeting if you need to. There's another question here. Has the master element list been mapped to any schemas, such as Dublin Core or mods?
They have not, but that's a good question because that is a future step. So one of the things, especially when we did our survey, started bringing in our survey data, we kind of knew this already, but we realized that everyone has their own schema, everyone has their own institutional standards or whatnot as far as how they're describing objects in their collections. That said, we want to, we're hoping that once kind of the tool is live and out of beta, the next step would be looking toward probably getting some grant funding to hire some folks to do some schema specific mappings. So that much in the same way we have our personas, as far as like if you're a public librarian and you're have an oral history, local oral history collection, here's a public librarian, here's their elements list, you might be interested in that. It would be analogous to that in that you'd say, oh, I use Dublin Core, here's a Dublin Core mapping for all of these fields if you want kind of a one-to-one mapping system, and then that's something that you can export as well. So we decided that that would kind of be phase two after the tool is live, just because we know that's going to take some work, and it's not necessarily things that I'm not sure, even with all of us, I'm not sure if we would touch. I don't know how many different schemas we want to use, and how much experience each of us has in that. So we'll probably hire some folks or contract with some folks to do that. But hopefully in the next year or two, that's something else that we can add to the tool.
Right on, thanks. Got another question here. Would archival standards like DAX apply to oral histories as well?
Yes, in fact, there are plenty of institutions that are using DAX, and they have oral history collections. Um, that's probably one of the things that we're going to hope to do with the tool in the future, is give people a sense of, based on whatever environment that they find themselves in, what's the best corollary with all the work that we've done. So yes, DAX and double core and all of these basically, all the mods out there basically are things that we're interested in at least providing some base level of mapping in the future.
Okay, great. A couple more things, and Jean, I'm sorry you were having hard time hearing. I had to turn up my volume as well. And so for those of you who did have trouble hearing, really sorry about that. And hopefully we can make it up to you with any captioning at the end after we've published. Jean was wondering if you might be able to share the metadata form and processing form that you use, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Or is that
I went ahead and turned up my microphone just in
oh,
case.
thanks, Stephen.
Okay, so the metadata form. So which form is it? The content DM form that I was showing?
No, it was that list of all of the steps to go through.
Oh yes, I can provide that. Yes,
I thought that was very, very useful.
It is. We mainly use it to describe to people just what a long process it is for everything we do. And it's changed a little bit too, as far as, especially when we get to the review phase, because that was one thing when I came into my position, we had no tracking mechanism for those who we sent transcripts out for review. So I was luckily able to help redesign our FileMaker Pro database, internal database. And so now we track and we can get alerts when things are due as far as review is concerned. And based on the data that I've crunched through that, I've learned that people either return their transcripts to us within a month, or we usually don't hear from them. So I've been slowly decreasing the amount of time we provide people for that process. But yes, I can share that along with the PDF of the slideshow, and it will be in the slideshow as well, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. And Jean, I notice you have another question here, but I think that we are going to be covering remote recording tips at an upcoming webinar this spring with the oral history folks. Jean asked about recording on the phone and how would you want to transfer that. So I think just to keep it in scope of today, Jean, hang on to that, and now you have to come back this spring when we hopefully bring Stephen back to talk about remote oral history recording techniques. And I think we have another couple webinars coming up with y'all this spring that we're really excited about. And Abra just shared something in chat. Oh, things are bouncing around. Example of using DAX and publishing in archive space. This is great, Abra. And you know what? I'll pull these out of chat and share them along with the email that shall have everything you need. And I do think since we're 5 minutes over time, we should probably call it. And I really, really want to thank you again, Stephen, for presenting today. And thanks, Abra, also for joining us and for both of you representing the Oral History Association. Thanks to Alex Suarez, my colleague, for all the technical support, and for all of you joining today, members and non-members of TDL alike. And I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday and see you in 2021. Great job, Stephen. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
Thank you, Leah.